Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining this Kemp Technologies webinar. And we have a very cool and exciting topic today. The title of this presentation and what we're discussing is 6 reasons you need to replace your F5 load balancer. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover some interesting options in terms of the pros and cons of the load balancing technology, what F5 does, and obviously some alternatives and what you can look at. So a couple housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please put them in the question section of this Bright Talk chat session. And I will go to a Q&A at the end of the conversation, at the end of this presentation, and we can cover that. And please follow us on our Bright Talk channel and our other locations on LinkedIn for Kemp Technologies and YouTube, and find some great technology interest discussions. So let's get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'll bring up the presentation here. 6 reasons you need to replace your F5 load balancer. And again, my name is Frank Yu. I'm the Principal Application Experience Architect at Kemp Technologies at Kemp. And my job is to really leverage my experience and talk about what is going on in terms of application experience, application networking, and how we can really manage that and leverage that in our designs to really build a robust network architecture. And today we're going to be talking about, again, uh, this overview. First, just real quick for people just to understand, what is load balancing? What do I mean when I say load balancing, and a little bit about the technology. Number two, F5, since we're going to be talking about F5 networks, formerly F5 networks, now called just F5. Quite a bit, a little background on who they are and what they do. And then, is F5 right for you? Are they the right solution? And in some cases, yes, and in other cases, no. And I'm going to give you some information related to that. And then, since we're here on a Kemp webinar, we're going to talk about the Kemp difference in terms of what the Kemp load balancer, what we call the load master, does, and how it can really benefit you in your environment. And a quick summary. So let's get into the meat of this discussion. What is load balancing? Load balancing introduced around 1997. The first commercial load balancer was Cisco's local director. I remember using that product way back when, and it was very different from what it is today. Load balancers have evolved quite a bit. In fact, around 2004 timeframe, some of the analysts introduced a new term called ADC, Application Delivery Controller, because they thought, you know what? Load balancer does so much more than load balancing. It's no longer a proper term. They said it does things like authentication, firewall security, web application firewall, and lots of other interesting features, link load balancing. And they decided that they needed the term ADC. But you know what? Honestly, most people in most situations where you're looking for an ADC, the use case is still load balancing. So we still look for that core load balancing functionality. And here's a reason why load balancing still exists and is still so relatively popular, is that load balancing is a key technology for this concept of a digital transformation, for this migration to IT, making IT do things, for this cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment. We need load balancing technology because it's what keeps applications running. It's what ensures that we see a healthy application from a user perspective. So load balancing is a very, very critical application technology in your network, and it's something that you should definitely consider. And when we talk about load balancing, there are 2 key functions or features or products or solutions or whatever you want to call it that cover the concept of load balancing. First is what we call server load balancing, SLB. This is where we act as a reverse proxy and we manage pools of servers. We have something that we usually call a virtual IP address, or VIP, that's hosted on the load balancer. You can see the diagram on the right-hand side. And there are servers behind the load balancer in the bottom of that diagram that are doing the same function. And the load balancer is, as the name implies, distributing the load across those multiple servers. And there's lots of cool things that we can do. We're not going to go into the full details of it in terms of content switching, persistence, load balancing algorithms, but is a very, very cool technology for maintaining application health and availability. Then there's this other thing called global server load balancing, which is very popular, goes hand in hand for the most part because it does the application availability, but it does it from a site perspective. So if you have two data centers or one site in the cloud, one in the data center, or two different clouds, whatever the case may be, global server load balancing manages the connections across the two sites so we can do things like disaster recovery. Always go to one site, and if that site fails, then go to site B, or distribute the load based on the sites, or do some geographic distribution. So if you're in North America, go to the North American data center, not the one in Europe. Global server load balancing, we separate it because it's actually different in terms of the technology. It's not managing the connections for the actual connections using a virtual IP, but it's managing DNS. It's kind of like dynamic DNS system, manipulating the DNS so that the clients go to the appropriate site. And these two technologies, server load balancing, global server load balancing, are often used together to create this application availability, scalability, et cetera environment. So when I said that this cloud digital transformation virtualization requires load balancing, what are we talking about? Why is it still relevant? Number one, it gives us the scalability. You can only build a server to be so big to handle so much performance and so many connections. If your application becomes popular, if you're e-commerce and let's say it's Black Friday or just this past couple of days, we had Amazon Prime Day. So a lot of people going onto the website, trying to do shopping, checking out, and they might be going to your site, which is may not be Amazon, maybe your own little e-commerce company. And because you're hosting sales along, piggybacking the Prime scenario. And if you need to scale, instead of building bigger and bigger and bigger servers, you build lots of small ones or medium sized ones and you stick them behind a load balancer. If you need more scale, you add more servers. You need to downsize or use the resources somewhere else, you take out the servers, put them somewhere else. Second thing is availability. We want to make sure that the application is always on. Using that e-commerce example again, you don't want your site to be down when everybody's trying to get to it to do their shopping, because obviously you're not going to be getting the revenue and the sales if your site's not working. Same thing for internal applications. Your employees are going to be unhappy if they can't access their internal application, like even like email. If I don't get my email, if it's not connecting, I'm going to be very unhappy. The load balancers do health checks to make sure that the applications are there. And agility, the ability to change and move things quickly and easily. So to be able to migrate things from on-premise data center into the cloud, to change the application, to change pieces, to move things around becomes so much easier because the load balancer is acting as that proxy, as that interpreter in front of the applications and all the backend stuff that makes it much easier to make those changes on the back end. So load balancing is really cool technology. It's still very relevant. And this comes to discussion that we have for this presentation. Who is F5? Why am I saying that there are 6 reasons you need to replace your F5 load balancer? Who is F5? F5 is a networking company. They make load balancers. They've been around since about 1996, 1997, and they make what we call a legacy ADC. When they say legacy, it's because it's primarily appliance-based, hardware-based products that were sold back in the I say old days, in the internet world, old days, back in the early 2000s timeframe where things were done based on hardware. We sold appliances back then. We liked hardware. We liked buying, when we bought a firewall, we bought an appliance. We bought a box and we installed it. Same thing with load balancers. F5 is a large company. They have about 4,500-ish employees, plus or minus. They have about $2 billion of revenue, which is pretty darn good, based in Seattle, Washington. And their products, the primary product we're going to talk about is Big IP, which is their load balancing product, but they also have other products called Engine X, which they acquired, something called Web Safety acquired. They just acquired another company called Volterra, which does edge computing. So they do lots of different things, not just load balancing now. They've diversified quite a bit. They have a very extensive product set. But what we're going to be talking about is the load balancing stuff, the Big IP. And there are hardware appliances I-series platform. So their product names are going to be like I-2600, I-2800, I-5600, something like that, I something. And if you want something that's different from a pizza box, what I call pizza box form factor, they also have their chassis, which they call Viprion. They're their chassis for the high-end, high-performance, relatively expensive product, but it does very, very high throughput. And then they have their software version, which they call VE, their virtual edition. So they have their VE software, their Viprion chassis, and their I-series, and these all run the Big IP product set. Under the hood of all these things, we have Big IP, as I mentioned, which is their brand name for the platform for all their ADC services, their load balancing services. It is one build of code for all the features that you turn on and off. And we'll talk about these features in a minute. And all those different features and modules or products are activated with license keys on that Big IP software. The engine that drives those products and those pieces is called TMOS, Traffic Management Operating System. It's running on a customized Linux kernel software for the Big IP products. But the important thing to note is that it leverages a lot of customized hardware functionality. So there are FPGAs, field programmable gateways, specialized silicon. There is specialized memory available in the Big IP products. For example, they use ternary CAM, TCAM, for memory, which is what we call a tertiary content addressable memory. They have control plane management through something called iControl. They like using the I in front of a lot of their product names. But the TMOS is like the operating system. It's like the Windows for their Big IP products. And then they have the products, which are the software pieces like your Microsoft Word, your Exchange, your Internet Explorer, or now Microsoft Edge browser. Those are the products that sit upon this operating system, this TMOS, which is, again, like that Windows OS on your computer, making analogies. So that's what you get inside all the products. And when we talk about the different products available, the different components, the different things you can license functionality wise, it does a lot. It can do a lot of different things. They've leveraged that TMOS code and that Big IP brand to do so many different things. So now that Big IP code is actually pretty bulky. It's a pretty large piece of software because it does so many different things. Number one, that server load balancing that we talked about, which they call LTM, Local Traffic Manager. Very common. I hear people using the term LTM as a generic term. It is an F5 specific term, Local Traffic Manager, for that standard server load balancing. Then they do the global server load balancing, which is a product that they call Big IP DNS. A lot of people, including myself, still refer to it as GTM, Global Traffic Manager, because GTM used to be the name and they rebranded it to Big IP DNS. But GTM/Big IP DNS is that global server load balancing that I talked about for site availability, disaster recovery, et cetera. And that's another separate product. Third product that they have available, licensed within Big IP, is AFM, Advanced Firewall Manager, which is your very, I'm going to say, typical network firewall. It is going to be like your Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Fortinet type firewall in terms of functionality and capabilities, and that's built into that product. So it's doing the primarily network-based firewall functionality. And it is built into the, again, Big IP. The fourth thing I want to mention here in terms of products is APM, Access Policy Manager. This is their customizable solution for edge authentication. So, doing customized login screens and customized login capabilities or integration with authentication databases or two factor authentication, single sign on, that type of functionality all falls under the APM portfolio in terms of functionality. And the next piece I want to talk about, the next major piece, ASM, Application Security Manager. This is their web application firewall. So the standard industry standard term, web application firewall, where we're doing inspection, applying rules, and allowing, denying, and whatever the case may be for HTTP, HTTPS type traffic, web traffic, falls under the category of ASM, providing security functionality for websites and web content. So those are the five main products within the F5 product line. And, and that's what you're usually going to see. But there are also some other ones. There's Big IP CGNAT, carrier grade NAT. This is mostly for the telcos and large companies where they're doing IPv4 to V6 translations, V4, even V4 to V4 translations, dual stack, anything related to IPv6 tends to fall under the carrier grade NAT solution. And then they even have something called Policy Enforcement Manager. This is something that's telco based again, and this is something that acts like a PCEF, policy charging enforcement function, if you know mobile technologies, that does the inline traffic management based upon policies for users and things within the carrier environment on that SGI LAN part of the network. So again, big IP software. One big package does lots of different things, and you can license each of these things individually, or you can bundle them, etc. And then the next big thing that we always talk about, we being F5 users, and I have been an F5 user in the past, is iRules. iRules is data plane programmability. So if the software out of the box, you cannot configure it to do what you want to do in terms of functionality for your load balancing needs or any of those products that I just mentioned on the previous slide, there's iRules, which is a programming language. Originally was TCL based or Tickle based, and they upgraded it. I'll say upgraded it to iRules LX, which is Node.js based. But as you can see here in the screenshots, you can't read it, and I don't expect you to read it. It's a programming language. It's like learning any other programming language. Like if you want to learn C sharp or Python or Java or something like that, you need to learn the programming language like iRules to be able to do it. So you need someone that is knowledgeable with the iRules programming language to be able to configure it and do things. It's very customizable. You can do lots of different things with it, which is really cool. But the disadvantage is you need an expert programmer to be able to do it. So you need to manage that properly. But iRules is a big piece of the F5 story. In fact, you can see the stat here. Approximately 80% of all F5 big IP load balancers, ADCs, deployed in the wild, in the field, have iRules configured. 80%. And my takeaway is two-part. One is that's really cool that 80% of the customers are using iRules to do customized things on their F5 products. But two, it's kind of, 80% of the customers need to use iRules to do things that does not come out of the box. So what does that mean? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So that's kind of a rough, high level overview, a little deep dive in the technology of F5, their load balancing products, and some of the good and bad things about it, but let's get to the meat of why I created this presentation, why I want to talk to you about this. 6 reasons to replace your F5. Here are reasons that I think and other people that I talk to think that are important for you to consider to think about using something other than F5. Reason number one is complexity, and the complexity is twofold. One, you have all these different products that I just talked about. You have LTM, you have DNS, you have ASM, AFM, APM, maybe CGNet, maybe PEM. And they're doing all these things, and you may not be licensing them all. In fact, the majority of the cases, you're not licensing them all. You may be only licensing LTM, the server load balancing piece. But you know what? The code and the capability for all these other modules is still in the product. It's just unlicensed. And there are interactions on the back end in the TMOS for these different things when you are licensed or unlicensed. So it creates complexity in terms of configuration, creates complexity in terms of management. So having all those pieces, having that big bulky software do all these different things, and in some cases, really cool things if you need all that functionality, but it makes it really hard for you to configure and manage on a regular basis with all these pieces stepping on each other's toes. We've heard repeatedly from F5 customers, past and present, that F5 products require a serious amount of time to learn in terms of training and expertise, to have on site staff that are F5 experts to be able to manage these products. Reason number two, hardware and software. The world, at least today, is going software. We're doing things in the cloud. We have things virtualized. We're using hypervisors and installing virtual machines and putting things on multiple applications and servers. Meanwhile, we still have hardware. And the F5, because it is a legacy type solution, the code was originally written for and still uses proprietary silicon to take advantage of certain functionality in terms of performance, capability, efficiency. There's those FPGAs, customized silicon, there's customized or specialized memory and other pieces. It's not off the shelf when you buy an F5 piece of hardware. It's not all off the shelf components. They're customized components. So the takeaway here is, what happens to the software? If I then have the software version of the product, what am I missing? Because I don't have that specialized hardware that the TMOS code and Big IP code is taking advantage of. Am I losing functionality? Am I losing performance? Am I losing a combination of both? But they are not apples to apples anymore when you compare the two to each other, even though you think it's the same code, because they have a different underlying structure. This is something to consider when you move forward on what makes sense in terms of your platform, whether you need hardware or software, or if you're moving in a software direction, to look for something that has a software bend or lean towards it in terms of making sure that you get something that's designed for the environment that you're going to be putting it in. Number three, let's go back to that iRules. iRules is really cool. It can basically, you can configure that F5 Big IP load balancer to do anything you want with iRules. I had a friend who used iRules to configure the F5 load balancer to be a DHCP server. And my first thought was, why do you want to do that? He's like, there's no reason, but I can. And that was his reason, because he could. It was cool. So 80% of the customers, as I mentioned earlier, ballpark, use iRules. Does this mean, and it does, that F5 is deferring some of their development to in terms of their product to say, hey, we're not going to put it into the product because you can just do it with an iRule? And this was a great example is HTTP redirects. For the longest time, F5 did not have it within the product itself to do an HTTP redirect. You had to write an I rule for it, which means it's software based. Therefore, it might be, have some performance issues versus the specialized hardware because it's not using specialized hardware, et cetera, et cetera. And it became it's kind of a crutch for F5 to say, oh, you want something done? We can just write an I rule for it. But that means that you need to have a full time expert programmer or close to it to be able to do it or pay expensive consulting fees for someone who is a full time expert I rules programmer to write it. And then you have to hire them periodically to maintain those rules if things change. And it becomes a burden in terms of support and managing that. Customers love the flexibility of iRules, like I said, because it can do anything you want it to do. But on the other hand, the same customers will tell you they hate iRules because it is a pain to manage and keep that expertise to be able to contain and write new iRules, et cetera, et cetera. iRules is a great thing if it's done properly. The problem here, I think, is that F5 has let iRules kind of take the lead in terms of you need something capability, we'll figure out an iRule to do it. And again, that follows up in terms of the support and the requirements in terms of you being able to manage that iRule. Reason number 4, F5 is expensive. You would think that it makes sense that with all those products and capabilities within the big IP software, it requires a lot of development, requires a lot of effort. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm not paying for the license, but you know what? Somewhere in the base cost of the product, you are paying for some of the functionality. So here's an example, and I'm using Kemp because I work at Kemp as my comparison. In Kemp, we have a Loadmaster. That's the product name for our load balancer, the Loadmaster X15, and I'm comparing it to the F5 i2800. Throughput 15 gigabits per second versus 10 gigabits per second. These are both hardware appliances. These are both what I call pizza box form factors. In terms of an SSL throughput, 12,000 transactions per second versus about 4,300 transactions per second. By the way, all of these numbers I'm taking straight from the data sheets from both vendors. And the prices I'm taking based on publicly available list prices that I have been able to find that I believe are relatively accurate. Concurrent connections, 35 million concurrent connections versus 14 million concurrent connections. And here's the big kicker for me, the list price of the products. So throughput, SSL, concurrent, about the same. Loadmaster is about, let's say, about 50% higher, a little higher in other cases, but throughput about 50% higher. The list price is almost a third of the price of the F5 product, $9,800 versus $27,900. That is a huge price gap. And that's for a perpetual license. In other words, you buy the box and you have it, and now you have to then pay for your support services, annual things like that. I did not include that. This is just for the list price for buying that perpetual license, buying the box out, from the vendor or from your partner. That is a huge price difference. And does it make sense in terms of functionality and thinking about the requirements of what you need that product to do for that price gap? It's like when I buy a car. Am I going to buy a car that costs $20,000 or am I going to buy a car that costs $60,000? Is it worth it? Yeah, I really like the $60,000 car. It has lots of features. It's built really nice and does great things. But the $20,000 car does really well. It gets me from point A to point B, has great gas mileage, et cetera, et cetera. Does it make business sense for you to get the one that you're getting? And you can see here, if you want to do some more price comparisons and other comparisons in terms of functional capability, there is a web page you can go to on the Kemp website comparing Kemp to F5 and even Citrix as well. Number 5, and I kind of alluded to this or mentioned this at the very beginning of this presentation. We estimate I estimate that about 90% of all projects that need an ADC, an application delivery controller, really and truly only need a load balancer. What do I mean when I say that? They only need server load balancing and maybe global server load balancing. All the other things are not necessary for the project. They're load balancing pools of servers or multiple sites for pools of servers, and that's the core functionality that they want. They don't need the network firewall. They don't need the edge authentication. They don't need these other things possibly. They just want the core load balancing functionality. So, what you're getting from somebody like Kemp, for example, is you're getting the tool that meets your need and is designed to meet your functionality needs and is designed to meet it well and easy. Meanwhile, with F5, with all these other components built in, with the complexity and everything else, you're getting that you can see here my multi tool, or the other common analogy is your Swiss Army knife. And that Swiss Army knife, yeah, it can do lots of cool things. But you know what? The only thing I do is I pull out that Phillips head screwdriver on the end of it or the pliers, and that's what I use it on, and I don't use any of the other tools. You know what? That's really true for the multi tools that I have. I have lots of them at home, and I use maybe two tools on each one of them: the knife and the screwdriver. So why do I have the multi tool? Because I thought it was cool. And I was thinking, I might need that saw in that multi tool, or I might need that bottle opener, but I ended up never using it. So think about the projects that you and where you deploy your load balancers and your F5 load balancers, and go through the list of what the requirements are in terms of functionality you need in that environment. And I think maybe you might surprise yourself to say, yeah, this is a lot more than I needed. And because of that, it adds all these other pieces, some of the other pieces I mentioned, like the complexity and other pieces that I talk about to the environment. Reason number 6, lack of true network telemetry. Now, we haven't talked about that so far in this presentation, but this is important: visibility. The load balancer is in this critical point in the network. It's channeling all the client connections through the load balancer into the servers. So there's a lot of interesting and valuable visibility in terms of the application performance, what is happening, how the user experience, the application experience for the application and the network and the user. And this visibility needs to be extracted from the load balancer somehow. The best way to do this using the technologies available today, using a flow technology, using Netflow, Netflow v5, Netflow v9. Netflow is a technology that was designed by Cisco back in the mid late 90s. And then we have the internet standard IP We have other standards like JFlow, which is Juniper's version of Netflow. And they're all based on this packet header or some basic content stuff, and collecting lots of great telemetry, lots of great analytics for you to look at the data of how your application and network is performing. There's another technology out there called SFlow. SFlow is a good technology. It's a sample technology, so it's different. It's not designed for security because it's sampled. It's really designed for high performance and scalable networks because of that sampling, because it can scale much better to tens of gigs and hundreds of gigs and terabits per second of throughput. Um, and F5 decided to only support SFlow to minimize the performance impact on the big IP platform. They don't support Netflow, IPFix, JFlow, these other flow technologies. So they're missing out on giving us this rich analytics of what is happening to my applications on the network and other pieces. Bonus reason. You know what? I said 6. Everything said 6. I decided, you know what? I'm going to throw a 7 in there. Support and customer satisfaction. And this is true across multiple third-party peer review sites. And here I'm showing it from Gartner Peer Insights. Most of y'all know who Gartner is. Gartner is that big IT analyst company that everybody talks about. And on Gartner Peer Insights, which is user-driven ratings, they're not driven by the vendors. So the users put them in, and they're actually validated by Gartner as customers of that product. F5 is not the top rated load balancer. Not surprisingly, since we are sponsoring this webinar that we're doing here, it is Kemp. Kemp has a 5 out of 5 rating. F5's rating is around 4.5, 4.6 out of 5. Good, but not as high. And even more importantly, the number of ratings. So Kemp has over 300 ratings, over 50% more ratings than F5. So it is very well accepted. And this is true across other peer sites. So if you go to somebody like a Trust Radius or G2, which are other third-party peer review sites, you'll see similar stories. F5 is not the top-rated load balancer. And this is from the customer perspective. So it's not for me to try to convince you. It's for you to get information from your colleagues and peers to understand why do they think one is better than the other. So I certainly recommend that you go and browse some of those reviews and look at other pieces. Real quick, I do have one question here. I'm going to interrupt just here. Somebody asked that they missed the start of this presentation. Will you watch it later? Absolutely. All this is be recorded on demand through BrightTalk. So if you come back later, you will be able to hear these presentations in their entirety in the future. And you can see and listen to our past presentations as well through the BrightTalk channel. So let's spend a few minutes to talk about why Kemp. Well, why Kemp? I'm biased because I work for Kemp, but I think Kemp has a great product. Kemp has a great solution, and here's the reasons why. So number one, Kemp, we focus on load balancing technologies and the corollary technologies. And our mission statement is basically we power the always-on application experiences that enterprises and service providers need to succeed. What do I mean by that? What I mean is we care about making sure that that application works as you require, whether it's 24/7, on demand, scalable, etc., and that the user experience, that UX, is driven by the application experience. How that application performs across your network through the different interfaces, through the components, through the load balancer. The load balancer is helping manage and provide the visibility into how the application is performing through the technologies that we talked about. And how do we think we compare when we talk about these things that we just talked about? Number one, Kemp is simple and easy to use. We focus on the core load balancing functionality. We do server load balancing. We do global load balancing. We can also do web application firewall and edge authentication. But the primary use case, like I mentioned, is that core load balancing functionality. And therefore, we try to make that as simple and easy to use to configure and set up. If you are just a halfway technical person, I can almost guarantee you that you can go to our website now, download a free or trial version of our product, and you can probably get it running within a couple hours. It is not that hard to do. We have templates, we have documentation, etc. It is very simple. It does not require significant investment in terms of your learning to be able to deploy these. Number two, that network telemetry that we talked about, that visibility. This is becoming important. This is what we're all talking about nowadays. So for the past 30 years in this IT industry, we talked about building. We need to build out. We can't build fast enough. We need to get to a point where we can build this to do X. We're finally getting to a point where we're asking ourselves, what is happening on all this stuff that we built? We're talking about orchestration and automation and analytics and big data and all these pieces. This is what network telemetry is all about. It is about giving us the visibility into what we built, visibility into how the application is performing. So when we talk about application experience, what does that mean? And how do I determine, how do I see what the application experience is? And the network telemetry is what you need to be able to get there. Number three, unmatched value in terms of cost and savings. We saw that comparison is about for the same dollar figure, you're getting about 4 times the performance when you compare to F5 and Citrix. The numbers will vary depending upon the products you're comparing, but it's going to be very close to that. In some cases, it's much even is an even larger discrepancy. But I can guarantee you that the cost for performance is going to be significantly lower using Kemp. Does that mean that is a lower quality product? Absolutely not. What it means is that we're focused on the functions that you need in that core load balancing capability and not putting the bells and whistles that you don't need into the product, even though you're not turning them on and charging you for it. And again, world class technical support. Our support organization, I've worked for many companies and I love these folks. They do an astounding job working with our customers. They will help you not just with working problems in terms of the box is not doing what it's supposed to. There must be a bug, or I need to return this or replace it because there's a hardware problem. But they'll help you on just understanding and configuring and using best practices to do what you need to do. And they're always available. Our support organization at Kemp has a 99% satisfaction rating, 99% plus satisfaction rating, and there's a reason for that. Seamless migration and application templates. So if you are currently an F5 customer and you want to and you're considering a move to Kemp and you have a lot of iRules, which you probably do. Like I said, 80% of the customers use iRules. There are professional services and there are some configurators and other things that you can use to help you migrate from iRules to Kemp configuration. And I can guarantee you 95% of the iRules that anybody uses, you do not need to customize any sort of script or anything within the Kemp configuration. It is an out of the box standard Kemp configuration built into the product itself, making things easy. Not having to customize every single load balancing application, even though it's a basic application. And speaking of those applications, application templates to make the configuration a breeze. So F5 has something called IApps. They're wizards for configuring applications. We have application templates for all the major applications, whether it's Exchange, SAP, Citrix, virtual desktop systems, um, lots of different applications available through our website, through support, to be able to make it easy to configure applications with pre-configured templates. So all the standard features and things that you need to do for the application are built into the template. Our goal is to put the expertise into the templates, into the product, so that you don't have to worry about that. So you don't have to worry about making mistakes or missing something for specific applications. Very flexible load balancing options with Kemp. We have the software-based load balancers on the left. We have the hardware-based load balancers shown here on the right. And the cool thing for us is that software and hard load balancers is the same software, similar to Big IP, but the big difference here is that we don't have any customized silicon. We're not using any FPGAs. We don't have silicon designers and ASIC designers, and we don't use customized, specialized memory or things like that. It's primarily common off-the-shelf COTS hardware that we put our software on, that we specified to get the performance and features that you need at a proper cost for or the hardware products. So the hardware and software virtual versions work exactly the same functionality, no hits or misses in terms of capabilities. And of course, we also have the cloud load balancer. So if you're going into the cloud with AWS or Azure, we have them in the marketplace for on demand. And of course, you always have the option to do bring your own license where you pay for a perpetual license and then you install a virtual machine into those public clouds. And this is true not only for those clouds, but obviously for other third-party clouds like Rackspace or IBM Software or something like that. You can certainly install the load balancers there. And we have a lot of partners depending on where you live and who you work with in terms of managed service providers, MSPs, and colo facilities, where they partner with us to provide Kemp load balancing functionality and Kemp load balancing capability. So certainly, if you work with those types of partners and vendors, reach out to them to see what they have in terms of Kemp offerings. This network telemetry, this flow technology is really important. Kemp, we acquired a company last year called Flowmon, so we call it Kemp Flowmon for this flow technology using this Netflow, IP fix, S-Flow capabilities. And we have now built that into a probe available within the Loadmaster load balancer product. So you can get that full Netflow, IP fix, S-Flow export from the load balancer from Kemp, and then you can send it to some sort of collector that provides the analytics, the display, etc. You can use a third party if you want to, and certainly, obviously, we have at Kemp we have the Flowman collector, which has a lot of great analytics and heuristics that can do lots of cool stuff in terms of network visibility, network performance monitoring, application performance monitoring, network detection and response. (NDR) is really popular nowadays because it's security related. So looking for ransomware attacks, looking for worms and viruses in your network, looking for the potential you being hacked from a network perspective. This is a technology that can help you with that. And again, from a load balancing perspective, it can give you great insights into the connections and application performance and other aspects in terms of operational troubleshooting. One more on this network telemetry because it is kind of new, at least from our concept, and it is again becoming a lot more popular in the industry for the past couple of years. It gives you that single pane of glass that gives you lots of visibility into different aspects. So you can see in real time performance degradations, not just from a network perspective. So you can see whether interfaces are hitting certain thresholds using standard tools or dropping off or links going up and down with standard tools. But you can see things not just from a bits per second on an interface, but you can see things based on connections and the flows in terms of sources and destinations. Is the application performing well? Is it being heavily utilized? You can monitor this. You can trend this long term for trending analysis. And in terms of the real magic of this is real time operational management and troubleshooting. So if somebody calls with a problem and they say, I have a problem with X, your job is to figure out what the problem is, why it's a problem, why they think it's a problem. Is it a network problem? Is it a server problem? Is it a user error problem? And this tool can help you isolate and track down and drill down quickly and easily to get to the root cause of these issues or potential issues to the point where you can start doing this, dare I say it, proactively. So that is really, really cool. So, key takeaways here in terms of comparing, looking at F5, and I'll go to the right hand side of this slide first. F5, they have a full featured product portfolio and they have really good capabilities in their product. I'm not complaining about that at all. They do lots of great things, and based on all the different products and pieces, there's lots of great features. But F5 does focus on more than load balancing. You'll notice in their messaging and what they advertising and what you're seeing from them lately is much more security focused, much more focused on I would say, on the larger networks, because obviously for them, that's where the revenue and that's where the market is going in terms of what's hot is security and things like that. F5 products are complicated. Anybody that has used the F5 product or gone through F5 training will tell you, yeah, they're complicated and it takes time and effort to learn how to configure and manage these products. That's a concern. And they're expensive because of all these things that we talked about, they are expensive. You're paying for functions that you're probably not using or enabling in terms of licensing. And even if you are, it's still relatively expensive compared to what you could get versus other places or other vendors. And last, as I mentioned, F5 is not the top rated load balancer. Is there a reason that the F5 is not being seen on these peer review sites as much as these other vendors, such as Kemp and even other vendors as well? And why would you want to pick something that is not getting the top ratings that you might be seeing from other vendors? And for Kemp, we support the load balancing. We support that core load balancing functionality. That's our primary goal in life at Kemp is support the core load balancing capabilities, that server load balancing, global server load balancing, focused on your load balancing needs because your projects primarily need load balancing and most of them only need load balancing. We're incorporating that network visibility, that network telemetry to give you the visibility using the flow technologies so that you can understand how your application is performing in real time and trending. And of course, we do show a better value in terms of the ROI, the cost for performance. Almost any way you slice it, you're going to see a value that makes sense. And the last, and I think one of the most important pieces, at least in my mind, is world class support, top customer ratings, 5 out of 5 stars on Gartner Peer Insights, top ratings on other third party peer sites, and that world class customer support. You can't knock it. It is so important for an organization to have access to that top support. So I'll leave it with this. If you are interested in learning more, download our trial software, kemp.ax/try. You can download it for free, 30-day trial. If you need longer for whatever you're looking at, you can certainly contact us. You can see the contact there, sales@kemp.ax, and we can work with you to do the proper trial that you need. If you want to read more about why people using Kemp have gone from F5 to Kemp, go to kemp.ax/binge/F5, and we have some stories to share with you of former F5 customers. And the trial options, virtual, of course, you can download it right now. You can go in the cloud. And it really, truly, if you want to do a hardware trial, we can send you a hardware box that you can try as well. So all the options are available for you to try. At this point in time, I'm going to kind of stop there. Thank you for listening to this, and we'll get into some Q&A. I have one question here that I see on the board. I have invested in F5's training. The team are skilled up on the products. Why should I move to something which I don't know? And the little quote that he puts there, or he or she puts at the end is, you don't get fired for buying F5. You know what? Absolutely. I agree with your statements. Number one, going backwards, you don't get fired for buying F5. We used to say back in the old days, back in my old days, back in the 2000s, you don't get fired for choosing Cisco when you buy networking gear. Yeah, they're the top player in the market. A lot of major players use them. Obviously, they have the market share, and their products work reasonably well. But is it the right thing for you? That is the main question. Just because the F5 products are the right product for somebody like Citigroup, is that the right product for you? And I apologize if you work for Citigroup. I'm not trying to call anybody out, but does it make sense? And even within somebody like Citigroup, is that the right product for that project within that organization, within the group, within that department? I used to work at Citigroup, so that's why I use them as an example. But there's a lot of different subcategories you can break this down into. So yeah, you don't get fired by an F5, but I'm gonna say right now that I know of nobody that's been fired for choosing Kemp as well. Investing in F5's training, you're skilled on the products, absolutely. You know what? Spend a lot of money and time and effort investing in that F5 training. And you had to because it took a lot of effort to get to it. And there are multiple tiers of the training and multiple sections of the training for the different sections. So you can do your certification for your LTM, you can do your 100 level or administrator type certification, you can get your expert level higher level certifications, get certifications for other products. And it takes weeks and months and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. You had to go through all that because it's complicated and hard to use and it requires all that training to do it right. You need specialized training just to learn I rules. Is that the type of thing that you want to invest in? If I buy my car, do I want to have to go through the proper training to be able to basically take the engine out and retune it and put it back in because that's what it requires every single time? No, I want to be able to get in my car and drive from point A to point B. You want, at least for me, I want something simple where all the other pieces are done under the hood out of my sight and I can just configure it and tell it to do what I want it to do and it works fairly easily for me. So pros and cons in terms of what you want to do. And honestly, if you're investing in F5 training, I think 40 at minimum 40% of what you learned in terms of the technology functionality, the primers, and how does load balancing work? Where does the virtual IP? How does direct server return work in terms of loopback addresses and again all these different technologies? It's consistent across the different vendors. The only question is how it's configured. Do you configure it through this menu or through that, through the CLI or whatever the case may be? And those are the differences. I have time for one more question. And this question is, well, if I'm currently using F5, how do I get from what I'm doing now to what I want to do with Kemp, possibly with Kemp or somebody else? And good. And the first thing I answer in this question is timing. You need to do it at the right time. And in general, the right time is either when you have a product refresh because the product's 3 or 4 years old. And that's when you typically do a refresh of your product to do an upgrade. That's typically what F5 tells their customers to do is you need to refresh your products every 3 years. So if you're going to refresh, you might as well open the door and look at other things. But honestly, because of primarily the price gap, I would also say anytime your products are coming up for renewals in terms of service renewals, you should take a look at something like Kemp. And the reason I say this is because the pricing difference is such that the support cost for your F5 product is essentially going to be close to the cost of replacing it, including the support and everything else with another product like Kemp because of that big price disparity. So those are the timing situations what I would look for in terms of doing that switch because you can't just easily drop things to the middle of things and do the migration. You do it at the right time. And two is related to the previous question, the technology, learning, the training, and everything else. That's what Kemp is here to help you for, at least from a Kemp perspective. I can't speak for the other vendors, but we have people on staff that understand the F5 products, that understand I rules, that understand the configurations, and can help you migrate from point A, point B, and give you the transition and on the job training, wherever the case may be, so that you can do the conversion from one vendor to another vendor and still be comfortable with it moving forward without any major gaps in terms of your ability to support it. And real quick, I have one last question that popped in because, in the interest of time, I have one question that popped in that says, "Does Kemp support SSH and APIs?" So, number one, does Kemp support SSH? Absolutely. So, can you? Well, two questions. So, the question I'm assuming SSH. Do we support it from a management control plane perspective? And the answer is kind of. So we have a GUI interface, what we call WUI, web user interface. We have access to the SSH shell into the product itself, but only under special circumstances, usually for troubleshooting and things like that. And we do that for special reasons, for security and other types of things. But alongside that, you talk about, do we have APIs? And the answer is absolutely. So if you don't have SSH, if you need to do things, for example, PowerShell scripting, to be able to do some automation, or do some other type of scripting, tickle scripting or something else, or something to be able to manage the Kemp product through a third party source. That capability is there through the APIs, and the API is a standard HTTP RESTful API to access the Kemp control plane capabilities. And that's all documented, and the capabilities and the commands and calls that you can do and the gets that you can do through the API is all documented through the Kemp website. Contact us if you want more information. Contact us at sales@kemp.ax, and we're more than happy to send you more details. Non-salesy, of course, in terms of what we try to do with you in terms of pushing things, but just giving you the information so you have access to the proper stuff. So at this point, I'm going to close this. I'm thank everybody for attending this session. Hopefully, it was useful. Hopefully, it was insightful, at least entertaining. And I certainly welcome you to listen to this on demand afterwards and follow the Kemp channel on Bright Talk. Our YouTube channel has lots of great content as well. Follow us there and look for future webinars from us as we continue to put them out. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.